Hello, everybody. This is Achilles Justice here. We are with the Philosophy Society. It is December 6th, 2023. We are in the Toronto Metropolitan University Library. We have people in the room, people online, and people in the future, which is currently the present. You're watching this as the past. So, yeah, last week was good. Went through important information in the context of self, and we talked about some emotional stuff again. Today, I never know what I'm going to talk about. I'm always like, whatever, you know? Yeah, like what comes to mind is being. And I guess I'm just continuing on last week's discussion. So I would like to define being as the totality of your existence. That's one way to talk about it, right? And if we have like, you know, the individual, the person, the being, there is the self-expression of the being. So the being is like over time, if you like were born here, and then let's say you died there, the being is the whole thing. And it's not just like what you see. In some ways, it's what other people see too. That's why I say it's like the totality of your existence. And so, you know, like how do we, if this is the totality of your existence, right? Everything that's inside of there is this, okay? And yeah, like the problem, it can get a little confusing because there's everything that you know as an individual, but then there's like the perceptions of you, which could be other things. So it's just that there's reality, and reality is like the main full context. And within reality, there's everything that you kind of touch or have access to, right? It's not just your perspective. And that's important to talk about as a fundamental like property or situation, because it helps us accept and account for our own bias, right? Because I may see things in a specific perspective, but that's not what really is going on. And so remember we said before that science is a way to like have a counterbalance to those biases. How do I check to make sure that that which I see is real? And I want to test the measurement. That's like the scientific method. And we can critique that and make it better, right? There's the being. So the being, like, I guess we could say like, you know, we can massage these terms a bit, but I'm trying to get at something like that. And the self is a momentary expression of the being. Okay, so eudaimonia or like well-being, some ways we can say is like a trajectory of life. And so there's not just self-expression, but there's a whole bunch of things that are involved in that, like your physiology and your environment, your social group. There's many factors that compose our well-being, or that at least have an impact on it, right? Things that we can make decisions for and have some control over, at least indirectly. And so the self-expression, that is like what you are in the moment, right? In your existence, with your emotions and your attention. And it's almost like the character within the scene. Like what is the self? And we talk about self-expression, we're engaging in a certain degree of self-awareness. We're not just in the experience. Now this can create like a dichotomy here between, on the one hand, we have our feeling or our phenomenological perspective, which is how I see things from within my experience, right? And on the other end, we have like the self-awareness, how an other would observe you, right? So it's like being the actor. Whereas over here, you're behaving. So this one is internal, and this one is like external almost. And so we need to kind of put these two together to get towards that eudaimonia part. So for example, you may be upset, like customer service representatives have to do this, right? You're like upset about something, you had a bad day, and then you go to work, not just customers, but anyone in business really. And then you have to like smile. I'm smiling now, right? It's very fake. You're like, wow, that person, there's something going on with you, right? And so really what's going on is inside they feel something and they have to kind of mask over that. Or you have to compartmentalize your feelings. You're like, I can't feel this now. I have to kind of cope with that, put it aside, and then just be in this situation right now. And then I can like deal with my stuff later if I come to it, right? And so there's the actor part where I'm aware of myself and this is how people see me. I'm presenting myself in a specific way. But that's not necessarily going to lead to well-being, you know?
Did you see that did you watch Black Mirror?
I've seen some.
Do you remember that one with like social points, like social media points, but like social points? And basically like she's going to a wedding and then like she basically has like almost like think of like credit score instead of like excellent, she's like very good or good, but then she's obviously trying to get like a better score, right? And then she's like milking for compliments and making people like her. And then she was supposed to go to this high-end wedding so she can like get a better apartment actually. And then, you know, it's a Black Mirror episode, so obviously it didn't really go well.
Okay, yeah.
I would recommend watching it.
Yeah, so that social score is like what people perceive of you, right? And then they, and so you can get like a rating on that and how other people perceive you. But it's not necessarily conducive to your well-being because someone can be very successful financially and in business and then still be depressed and then like commit suicide, right? Like there's a lot of famous people, for example, who have this exterior perception, like Robin Williams, and then in the end, kill themselves. That's why it's important to have an understanding of the way we feel. And then we want to take that inner feeling and then find the best way to translate it in a form of self-expression. Or another way to say it is to develop the appropriate self. So I like to talk about units of self. And what that is like we have the self, and there's like earlier, like last week, I was talking about something akin to like the periodic table of elements, but like not a table, but a system of self, a way to understand the properties of the self in our expression. And we can modify those properties so that the self, in one sense, is adhering to what we feel in almost a gestalt way. Like you may have in the narrative of your life, you feel a certain thing, like you want to pursue a certain goal or you're interested in learning something. It's like curiosity, you could say, but it's more than just an emotion. It's like a disposition towards something, right? The emotion is just, it's not enough to explain what that would be, right? It's a little bit beyond emotion. You can have emotions about that, but you feel something. There's an inclination towards a specific direction in life. And your feelings or your emotions may incrementally lead you there. You're like, I don't know why I'm going to do this, but it just feels good. So I'm going to go over here and do this. And then they're like, hey, I love this. This is great. I never knew that's what it was, you know? Or you go there and you're like, oh, I don't like this. Now I've falsified it. And then my feelings will direct me the other way. I'm like, I know I don't have to go down that road because I've experienced it. I have a sense of what's going on over there. These units of self, some selves are bad selves. And the reason they're bad, and we just go through like now like a DSM kind of criteria of how we evaluate mental illness. And this methodology, this like conceptualization is a way to apply to problems of mental health and how we would navigate ourselves in real time. Like, what do you really do? You know, if someone says, don't be depressed, don't be upset. Okay. Can you just press the button for me? Like if it was so easy, I would do it myself, right? But that's not the way it works, right? The way that you feel is almost like the end result of a huge calculation of how you've led yourself to this point. And you're like, this point equals shitty. You're like, what? That sucks. You know, I don't want to feel like that. And so what do? Right? And so part of it is there's these units of self that have led you along the way, and you can modify a unit for a different unit. That's one thing that you can do. And we've talked about this. There's environmental factors that affect the self. And then there's like your social group, and there's different things that you can do that you can change the trajectory of your life, really. Right? When we talk about the units of self, what we want to do is we want to have some awareness and control over the properties. So if there's a specific emotion that you're experiencing, right, how you deal with that emotion is the expressional part. And really what you want to understand is that the being, so this is like the total being, there's going to be different facets of self from that being. And it's almost like it projects like on a TV screen. So when you have a TV, right, this is like an old TV, there's like a show on the TV. And the show can change, but the specific monitor itself doesn't really change. You can upgrade it, obviously, but that's where the analogy breaks down. And so when you change the channel, that's equivalent to changing the self, right? And it's the reason that it doesn't really matter for a TV, because it's not like the show itself would break the TV. If we change the analogy of a computer, some software is bad for the computer, right? I'm not sure what it would be if the software can really affect the hardware. I guess it can in certain circumstances, but like it deletes the hardware, like a virus, or a Trojan virus or whatever. But that's the point, is that some of the software part can actually have an effect on the functioning of the unit itself. And so with the being, we want to understand what is it that we can really change. Because some things we can't, right? This goes back to like the Stoic, what change/control kind of principle, that if we focus our attention on what's in our control, that will yield us more success because we can do something about it. If I get upset about things that are outside of my control, I can't really do anything about that, right? And so this notion of self-expression is a way to retain as much control over you as possible. That way you can lead yourself to a better place. There's two things. One is this perception of the other of us, right? The objectification of what we are. So we can even say that. And then over here is the subject. Objectification and subjectification. So you are in tune with your own internal experience. What are you feeling? And then we want to figure that out, right? But then there's how other people perceive us. Because if you just only go with the subject, we can get into problems. Like when I bring up the example of the psychopath, but I really just want to eat people, like the malicious, sadistic psychopath. I just really want to do it. Like, please let me just totally take advantage of this person and steal all their money, right? I would really love to do that. And you're like, well, no, that's not a way to deal with things, right? Or the depressed person that says, I just want to kill myself. There's no purpose of living. Humans are bad animals. We're destroying the environment. We should all just extinguish ourselves and the world would be a better place, right? There's an argument to be made for that. And that might be their internal, if they feel like that, right? From an objective perspective, we could say, no, that's not the right way to go about things, right? And then if we only stick with the objectification part, that can lead an individual to having no real identity, just being a cog in the machine that's part of the economy or whatever. And that in some ways dehumanizes you, right? So we have the problem of dehumanization and then a lack of identity. So that's not good. So we want to find a way to put these two together, have an understanding of these units of self as we go through our life, because there's different ways that you can go, right? There's these little different trajectories as you kind of make decisions or things happen to you, right? And like when you choose to live in a specific place, right? You may not know the consequences of moving in there. And the decision to move in there is like based on finances. It's not based on that like weird person that was your neighbor, and then you see them, and then they like kicked your dog one day, and now your dog's hurt. And if you knew that was going to happen before you moved in, you'd be like, well, fuck that. If I know what's going to go on, I'm not going to risk something that's negative, right? But we don't know. Certain things are beyond our awareness. This goes back to, again, the Stoic thing, where you really can only hold responsibility for what's in your control, which and fundamentally is down to your choices and your decisions, right? Which is very existential. When we're trajectorizing ourselves through life, we're going through things in life and we're trying to figure things out. One of those things is that unit of self stuff. How can I change and modify myself? So it's like you have different cells that you can pick, kind of. And the thing is that you get better, and that's kind of your personality. You get better at expressing yourself in a certain way, right? And a personality disorder would be that over time, an individual kind of always goes this way. And it always leads to like a negative place. It's not good. It destroys their relationships. It's bad for them. They don't feel good. There's different properties that we can utilize to evaluate that person's state or well-being, right? And so you could just be deterministic and say, well, that's just the way they are. They're always going to be like that. There's nothing they can do, right? Or you can be empirical and look at the trajectory of their life and observe instances where they went that way and say, well, what else could you have done? Right? And we can come at it from the phenomenological perspective, how you feel, what do you observe from your experience. We can also come at it from an objective perspective, what the other person perceives in you, or your self-awareness in some ways, not just what you're feeling, right? And there's things we can do to it. The problem with this, there's bias on either side, right? But my own individual perspective bias is different than the bias of us perceiving somebody and objectifying them. For example, like the fundamental attribution error is a specific bias where I will say that person's an asshole. I'll attribute their behavior to their character instead of looking at the situation they're in. There's something going on with this person, and that's why they're acting that way, right? Whereas for yourself, you might be engaged in like confirmation bias. You're seeking out specific information, or you have a cognitive distortion, right? You're like all or nothing thinking. Either it's this or it's that. That's all it is, right? And so we're going to have to apply some filtering mechanism to either approach. We can't just take both of them and then there's not going to be any problems. There's kind of problems all over the map. What we do is we have a way to evaluate those things via our critical thinking and our awareness of these biases and other kind of stuff. Right? If this is useful, okay, if it has some integrity to kind of move us along, right, that's good. But where are we going? And so we need to talk about values. That's the next, I guess, chapter or section of this whole thing. Values and purpose. And we can talk about principles too. In Meaning in Life, so I have a chapter on the website called Meaning and Purpose. And of the research articles I looked at and summarized, there are 3 properties psychologically that have meaning. And one of like the philosophy tropes is you're supposed to talk about what the meaning of life is, right? We don't really ever talk about that in any philosophy class ever. So it's like, I don't know. Yeah, but I think it's a thing, like, I'll take that. Like, let's talk about it. And so what it comes down to is having a future-oriented goal, which is a purpose. The second one is that purpose is significant, is that it's not just a trivial thing, like putting the cap on the marker. That's relatively trivial, right? But being able to communicate information to people that can help them and increase the quality of their lives, that is a significant goal, right? It qualifies the goal. It says this goal is different than that goal. It's a higher order goal. Coherence is the last property. That the narrative in my life all fits together with that purpose. If I had the purpose of like curing cancer, it would be incoherent to my current trajectory. Like if this is, so if I'm on this trajectory over here to this, and that's like Haley's like philosophy stuff, and then I put curing cancer is like way over here. It's like in a different, like you could do that, but it's way over there. I would have to like it would just be a different person. That's a different person. And so, yeah, so that's meaning. Right? So coherence, purpose, and significance. Okay, so those three things. So that goes to our purpose thing. So there's different kinds of purposes. And when you're in the moment, one of those questions that comes to mind is, what am I doing right now? So this is like a perennial question. And you should be able to kind of have some sense of that. And the reason why it's important is, at least now, time is a scarce resource, in the sense that we most likely will die. Most likely. And because of that fact, you know, what you do with your time is important, right? The quality of the time you have. And that goes back to the well-being thing. Yeah, so we'll just like, what am I doing? Right? And if you have an answer that connects these together, usually you would feel good, right? That not just the emotion, but the sense of how my specific instance connects to the overall picture, right? If I'm on the right path, it will elicit good emotions. I will feel that this is the right way for me to go in life, right? But for you to know that, for you to have a sense of it, you got to kind of like put this part together. If you're right here and you're like, which way do I go? I kind of have to have some sense of where I've been. And this goes to the philosophical principle of reflection. Reflecting is looking back and learning from what has happened, right? Like, what happened? Mm-hmm. And when you can have a sense of that, you can say, okay, I'm going to do this now. I'm just doing a little differently. And if you do that incrementally, your life, you build a life. That's what it is to live. That's a good thing. So, okay. So the what am I doing thing, right? Important. Now, principles, so values are, you know, that's what makes the thing significant in some ways. And it's what directs the purpose, you know? And so Nietzsche, one of his 5 major things that he talks about through Heidegger's evaluation of him, he has this thing called the revaluation of values. And there's a chapter on the website about that. Really what it means is, when I look at the hierarchy of my values, there's like number 1, and then like to the nth degree, we'll just say like 97. Like making sure the cap is on the marker. I do value that. It's not that because I care, I put it on every time. But it is pretty low. You know? Or like, I don't know. There's a lot of insignificant values. Anyways, the point is that what is the most important thing to you? And maybe there isn't one most important thing, like it changes order slightly. Like I think that our self, and when I talked before about self-interest and selfishness, and I said they're 2 different things, your self-interest is almost the most important thing, which is overlapping with self-love, right? If you don't truly take yourself as a priority, then everything kind of falls apart. And the reason for that is because you are always in your experience. If you could just like come out of this being and go into another one, it wouldn't really matter. You just like die, and then your soul just kind of floats over and goes into another thing. You're like, all right, I get to do it again. And that would be like, it would be a different existence, right? But that's not the game we're playing. People can believe in the soul and talk about spirits. And I would believe them if like someone shot them, you know, and then you could see the soul go, haha, didn't get me. And then like went into a rock and the rock moved around, or went into another person and animated that person. But it's not, it doesn't work like that, you know? Like there's not even any really convincing evidence. There's some things to say, like when you die, there's some like stuff going on in the brain, you know, but what that could be almost anything. We don't really know. We're just, some people say, I hope it's the soul, you know, or that'd be great if it was, you know? Okay, sure. I hope so too, you know, like, but I don't fucking know. So, yeah. So anyways, the revaluation of values. So what's the most important thing, right? And it's important to have some sense of that. right? For yourself. Because when you're making these decisions, you got to kind of go somewhere. And so it may be unclear. You're like, I don't fucking know what the hell I'm supposed to do right now. Go back to this. What am I doing? I don't know. And that's okay. So what we do is we use principles to guide us through. And we could talk, like, I think principles, like, we're going to use the big W word here. Wisdom, right? If you have the correct principles and a mechanism to evaluate those principles, that is almost an indication of wisdom. In the sense that if another person went down this path and you're like, don't go to the left because there's a bear trap there and I lost my leg, and you won't be able to see it and it will get you. And then you're like, fuck you. I'm going down there, and then you lose your leg. You say, that was kind of foolish of you. That guy told you not to go there, man. And you did it anyways. That was not wise, right? So a principle would be if someone tells you about a hazard, like smoking cigarettes causes cancer, the wise thing to do would to take it seriously. And if you are currently a smoker, this goes down to values, right? If you truly value yourself, not only valuing yourself in that instance, but it would also be like valuing like health hazards that are very clear and distinctly going to be a problem at some point in your life, right? Then you would have to implement a strategy to change your behavior immediately. That would be wise, right? It would be foolish to say, I'm going to walk in front of the bus. I'm going to try it out, right? But after years of bus incidents, and we don't even need to have a bus as a thing, like it's just large objects, we know really well that it's a problem, right? Evolutionarily, like a huge rock rolling down, like who knows, where did this instinct come from? The fear of large objects. It's been with us for a long time. We know. We didn't need to have wheels and gas and an engine for us to figure that out, right? So some things could be instinctual, but a principle is not just an instinct. It's not just fear, right? It's a linguistic little code, right? Like the principle is like X, Y, Z, and then this applies to a specific situation. And when you're in that situation, you almost like a computer, you execute this principle, right? So when you're over here and you're like, should I go this way or that way? And you're like, I don't really know. I lack the experience to know what to do. Or, and we talked about this before briefly, Jeremy brought up something and I responded to this. I don't know, it was like 3 weeks ago. If, like, in the context of addictions, someone has a consistent habit of doing something and they lack willpower, right? What do? Well, that's where your principles can distill out your experience. You can focus on the principle and it'll make it simpler for you to navigate the situation you're in, right? And the principle is something that is supposed to lead you to the correct answer. Correct as in, no, for it to be correct, it would have to be in line with some value, right? So for example, for the depressed person that wants to kill themselves, right, the correct answer may be eat all the pills or jump off the building. Why? Because I value the end of my life. And you can say, okay. And so that's where we have to talk about Nietzsche, right? The revaluation.
Maybe they like don't value the end of their life. Maybe they just don't value their life, right? Like their life, pretty much. Like they don't want to die. They just don't like their life, right?
Sure.
I think anybody wants to like die. I think no one's like the experience they're experiencing is not, living up to their expectation.
Sure. They're suffering. And they can't tolerate the suffering. Right? Yeah. And so if the value is do not suffer, and they've exhausted, they don't have any other principles to go with, and they're in these situations, maybe at some point suicide becomes the only other option from their perspective.
Yeah.
Right? From that internal phenomenological feeling, they're like, this is all I got. And then someone who has dealt with people that are experiencing suicide and has been in the hospital with them and argued why they should live in front of police officers and nurses. I've done this last year. Remember that?
You've been coming to these for a year? Wow.
More than a year.
I would say from an objective perspective, killing yourself is the wrong answer, right? There's another way we can figure things out, right? There's some other way we can, if I can't, so Jordan Peterson would say, if you can't take the suffering away, you can at least make a lot of good stuff to help you tolerate the suffering, you know? So, okay, revaluation of values. So what Nietzsche is saying is the order and ranking of what I think is important. Right? So as an atheist that has communicated the existence or lack thereof of God, some people are just like, I don't care. I don't even care what you have to say. I don't care what you have to say. God exists for me, right? And I'm like, okay. And so their value is it doesn't matter what you say, I will always believe in it, right? And that's the value, right? Whereas for me, my value would be, well, reason is more important than any specific belief, including God. And so through the process of reasoning, I was like, I'm done with this. That's what's some time in my life, right? And so depending on how we structure our values this way, you're going to get certain results. There's going to be certain things that you're going to determine, certain principles as you're going through your path that will lead you to a specific outcome, right? Which would be your purpose and your goals. And so that's why it's important if we have the being and we kind of have some sense of our existence in reality, the specific individualistic being, there's like the totality being and the individual being, you know? The individual being is just like what you see, like Achilles. There's different self-expressions of Achilles. And I always want to not be limited to my past, but I want to be trying to push the trajectory up, be a better version of myself, always, right? And that is easy because we have habit and neuroplasticity. If we didn't have habit, it's just chaos at that point, right? I appreciate your positive emotions. Even though they're relative to something else, it's still good though. So all of this stuff is great, but what is the context of this? Like, what are we really doing here? And that's where the value and purpose and principles comes in. And so being philosophical and having wisdom is knowing which principles to apply to the circumstance that you find yourself in. And those principles will really only make sense when you know what you value. Like what is important to you? So for values, there's the specific person, there's you, but then there's just humans in general, right? Some things are good for humans, like clean water. I don't know what human would say no to that.
The government.
Sure.
Yeah.
The anti-fluoride, yes. Clean water is a good thing. And it's almost a basic right for humans, just have, because we can't exist without it, right? Or like food security. We need to have nutrition and energy in the form of food, right? We need that. So this is basic stuff, but those are values that I'm trying to say is there's universal values for human beings. And that's where we develop human rights. We would all agree that, you know, humans, for example, the right to free speech, right? And not every society or social group agrees with that. And that's where we get into problems of like power. And part of the reason why the philosophy society, I think, needs to exist is to uphold things like human rights, so that individuals who are objectifying people, some form of psychopathology or whatever, they can't do that, right? We don't want that. That's bad. Some values are specific to you. And that's going to be relative to your own specific trajectory in life, right? Like, let's say that you're a young person and your mother bakes bread with you. And there's a lot of positive emotions. The process is great. And then at the end, you get to eat this fresh bread. And
It's a skill.
it's a skill,
Yeah.
right? And so you value that. And then maybe you decide to be a baker because you love it and you're doing it. So that's a specific value, right? And so we're going to have to put those together for each individual. There's going to be some universal principle values for all of us, like well-being, right, is a value, actually. And then the principles, we can philosophize those out. There's some higher ordered conceptual principles that you may only get in the logic of specific philosophy classes. And then there's specific life principles, which is what we're talking about here. Yeah, I guess like the next step is like talking more specifically about what these values would be for individuals. So like self-love is a value that I mentioned before. And what does that mean, right? How do we like being so yeah, so just like, you know, there. So one is like self-love, being pro-social. I think the understanding or the process of understanding, making sense of things and knowing the context of things, right? These are some values that are very, very useful because and in some ways you could say that they're also assumptions that I have in my entire system here, right? If you don't value understanding and you're more hedonistic, for example, you just care about partying and doing cocaine and drinking.
That's not just hedonism. Hedonism is a little bit more complicated than that. Okay, it's
Okay.
chasing the dragon. Okay, some people don't. Not all hedonists do coke. They just seek pleasure. Pleasure can look different for other people. Right?
Sure.
Yeah. Why do I sound so offended?
That's okay. So hedonism defined as the value of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain,
Yes.
right? So you could just be watching Netflix all day,
Yeah. It
right?
could be pleasure for some people. Yeah.
But that could turn into pain too.
Yeah,
know,
when you
like
get
something-
obese and you can't like move or do anything else anymore because you have like anxiety. Because I feel like you will have anxiety if you're in that environment for too long. I feel like you'll feel overstimulated coming out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or understimulated because you've just been stuck in that one spot,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, if you go out.
Oh, sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't understand. Yeah, you're right. So hedonism, seeking pleasure at all costs and avoiding pain at all costs, may not actually, that as a value may contradict other values. An easy example is going to the dentist is painful and uncomfortable.
And expensive.
And it costs money.
Well, in Canada, it's expensive. But yeah, hedonism can backfire because because some people want to be in their comfort zone, they will not expose themselves to risk, and risks equal growth. And then that's why we have people who peak in high school. I'm just kidding about the high school.
So yeah, so hedonism, so like pleasure, I don't know how much space here. So we have hedonism in general, pleasure / pain. It's as a sentient being, that which experiences pleasure and pain. It is a thing, it is kind of part of well-being, but we also want to contextualize the experience of pleasure or pain and like, what does it mean? Like, what kind of pleasure is this?
And moderation. I feel like everything needs to be done in moderation. There's so much pleasure. Then isn't there like a famous quote? Whenever you're seeking happiness, you'll never find it. Or no, when you expect or when you're looking for happiness, you'll never end up finding it because you're too busy looking for it.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
forgot how it goes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point about the hedonism, so there's extreme like addictions as a thing.
You're like cocaine addiction.
I'm just reflecting on I was at this like party and they just wanted to do coke and I was talking about stuff. It was like the understanding. I was like, what about this thing that happened in politics? And for me, that was pleasure. But for them, they just wanted to do coke and drink like vodka. Right? And then listen to music and kind of just like,
Oh, those seem like fun coke addicts because some of them just scream at each other for hours.
ah.
Yeah. It could have been worse.
So yeah, okay. So all right. There's types of pleasure, addiction, stuff like that. That's a whole thing. So the point is that there's certain values and we have to kind of like contrast them and have a priority for them. That goes back to the hierarchy of our values. And so it's like, I think that some of them, like self-love is probably the most important thing. And being pro-social is most likely next, right? Because it has to do with other people. And so the reason that self-love would come first is if you don't take care of yourself and you're only taking care of other people, then you may not exist. You're not taking care of yourself. And you're just using yourself as a means to an end for others, which is violating a Kantian principle. Yeah, I think just breaking what the values would be is the next main thing. And then within principles, the next step would be habits. And the habits would help us achieve the execution of the principles, right? So I can utilize meditation to fulfill the principle of being calm in intense situations so I can think clearly and manage what's going on, right? Like I had something going on earlier today and I had to leave the living room and go to my room, lie down and meditate.
Oh, sorry. Speaking of meditation, does anybody have Advil? No?
Mhm.
Okay.
No, in my car.
Okay. It's okay. It's like, go ahead. Go ahead.
So there are specific habits that are important, and we can go through those habits, like I said, meditation, for a specific end, right? And what that'll do is when you're in the moment, you're going to do that specific thing, and it'll help you change the trajectory of whatever path you're on, right? Which is also part of the self-expression thing, but there's like a meditation self. So we would just want to embody the meditation self, right? And yeah, so that's what I had to talk about first day, I guess. It was very easy for some reason.
Yeah. Can we go back to units of self
Yes.
and talk about it more? Like, what else
Okay.
would be under the description of self?
So to understand the self, we have to understand the situation.
Wait, is it like self-identity or like in what way are we talking?
So what's other units of self?
Okay, so like in a situation, right, there's like you and there's other people. Okay. And this is like situation 1. And then there can be like situation 2, you, other people. And so in situation 1, let's say that like, I just think of like inaction. Something happened and you didn't act,
Mhm.
right? So there was like, you were passive. You didn't communicate something that actually matters to you.
Mhm.
You felt something, but you were passive here, right? It was really the first time you experienced this.
Mhm.
Like maybe somebody said something that was racist, and you were like what? And before you really knew what was going on, you're like, hey, that wasn't cool. You know, and you weren't used to that situation, you didn't know what was going on, right? So in that moment, that you there was not the best, it didn't lead to the best outcome, right? The trajectory of your growth here was off. And so if you're in that situation again, you would change this self-expression to a different one, and you would say something to the individual. So let's say this time you get like angry, you're like, fuck you, don't say that. That's not a good word, right? And then the person just says fuck you back, right? Or whatever.
That's not a good situation either.
So you weren't passive, but now you became aggressive, right? So then we go to situation 3. So it's another instance where you can express yourself and you're slowly over time modifying how you express yourself within the context. And so there are different kinds of situations, right? And this is fundamentally what just growing up is, or like being you, being a person, is how do you act within a situation.
Mhm.
And everyone will have their own style, which is like your personality, but it has to do with your feeling and this objective analysis of you, right? Like how other people perceive you as well. And it can't just be what they want. Like if you're in the room and there's a bunch of people that are racist, like if you went to some thing and you're like, what the hell? Right?
Around KKK meeting.
This is like, what is going on here? So it's not just what they think that is the right answer, right? There's a way to bring this dichotomy of self and other together, right? And that's where we want to have certain principles like ethics and being pro-social that we can utilize to determine if the group is correct, if whatever Their analysis is how objective is it? And then what is the integrity of my feeling? What am I experiencing? And how do I make sense of that? And so for the feeling thing, that's where we go back to those three properties. One of them would be like coherence, right? There's like maybe quality. There's like intensity. How does the feeling fit in with my identity? How intense is the feeling or emotion, right? What is the quality? Is it good or is it bad? Am I upset? Am I happy? Right? Am I feeling off with my life and I'm confused? I'm like, what is this? You know, how did things get to this point? Right? And then with the others, we have to do some kind of we have to have some criteria to evaluate them. So like you have ethics, right? We have a bias check, right? And we have logic/reasoning. Just to throw out three things to utilize there, right? If what they say doesn't make sense, if it violates ethics, if the information is distorted in some way and it's not representing reality correctly, right? Then we can say, hey, like this is not accurate. There's something that we can change here to make it more representative of what's going on, right? And the individual, you may feel something's off, but you have to communicate it in some way. You have to say it in a way that makes sense to them. And they still might dismiss you. And so in that circumstance, you would just have to, you're not getting anywhere with those people, so just go hang out with somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? Or be by yourself. Right?
Being alone is better than being in that situation.
Yeah. So the self-expression is in the context of the situation. Right? And the situation might just be you by yourself. Right? That's like the fundamental unit or context. And then you can change the self-expression relative to the situation. So some situations, it's never going to be exactly the same, right? That's like the Groundhog Day movie. Bill Murray had the same day over and over again.
Yeah.
Right? You can watch that with Philosopher's Stone. But it's not like that. It's more like, you know, you just have to experience life, and there'll be variations as you go through, but it's being aware of what you did in the past and then trying to do something going forward in the future, right? That's a little bit different. You're expressing yourself a little bit different.
Okay.
And so it has to do with like, this is a way to solve the problem of personality disorders, fundamentally, right? Like the areas where it can become a problem is if the person lacks cognitive capacity, like if their memory doesn't work correctly, or if they don't have self-awareness.
But okay, for that to work, like, you know, like for sometimes those situations can cause someone like extreme distress. So they might not be aware of their surroundings or of their own values per se, right? So, I mean, how would that work then? Like having grounding techniques, is that weird?
Yeah, like if you're in a situation and you're feeling overwhelmed, right? Your feelings would take precedence first. That's the self-love thing.
Yeah.
Right? We said the values first is self-love, then it's pro-social. So what you would do is you would like, if you're overwhelmed and you're having a panic attack, you just say, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Right? You go home, you calm yourself down, or you go somewhere like to a park, wherever you are, you calm yourself down. And then it's reflection is like the next thing, right? Like that's not really a value, that's more of like a habit, which is to satisfy the principle of understanding. Well, the value of understanding, and then there would be a principle here. When things don't make sense or I'm in a weird situation, I make an effort to understand that what's going on. That's a principle. I'll make an effort to make sense of it. And the value is understanding. So principle is like action oriented. And then there's habits I can do to plug into the principle to uphold the value. Right? So we have value, which is like love. You can value love. And then there's principle. It's better to have loved and lost than not love at all. And then there's habits. When I feel love for somebody, I will always like respond in a loving way or whatever. That's a principle still. But it's like the response of being loving. You know, it's an action, it's like behavior. So value, principle, habit. And then habit over time will develop your character. This is the kind of person I've become. Now I've become something. Now the being is becoming. And that's like the self influence over time, but the being is like on a trajectory. The meaning of your life is now increased. Like me as Achilles Justice started out not as like bad you know today. I was a different person, right? And I became this guy. Changed my name, went to university for even longer, right? Put myself through the fire of these things, and I've like tempered myself, you know? And that's good because I value something, and I have principles that I have followed so that I can get to that point, right? And we could say, is that value important? For me, it was. That's maybe a specific thing. That's clearly a specific thing to this guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if your individual values contradict your universal human values, that's a problem, right? And we can even put addictions in this case, like the habit of drinking alcohol. And you say, well, why are you doing that? Well, what's the principle you're following? Whenever I'm upset, just get a bottle. Have one drink. Well, let's look at reality here. Does it always lead to one drink, or does it lead to more? Right? And then look at the value. I don't ever want to be upset, or I don't like being confused. Well, is that value legitimate though? Maybe being upset is important. Maybe our negative emotions are part of being human. And it's up to us.
Some negative emotions are good, like having anxiety before exam.
Yes, motivates you stuff, right? And so understanding what our values are is important because it is the foundation of this whole thing that we're doing in these situations. And then you may feel something because the situation is placing you in pressure of what you value, and it's contradicting that value, right? You're like, I can't stand for this. Like if I value like a very egalitarian, like everybody deserves respect, you know? Or like I from a feminist perspective, women deserve to be treated with respect, and what they say is important and how they feel is important. And then someone's being misogynistic in this situation. I would feel uncomfortable. I would be like, this doesn't make me feel good, you know? And then develop some principle to guide ourselves through those situations, and then follow it up with a behavior, make it into a habit, right? And this kind of goes in line with Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is like the next thing that I'd like to go through. Yeah.
What's the word that hedonism? Hedonism.
So it's like,
So how it's pleasure and pain at the same time.
no, it's just that these are the things that are part of it.
Okay.
So it's basically that I want to seek pleasure and avoid pain,
Okay.
right?
In a bad way,
It can
because
lead to a bad situation.
okay.
Because some things that are good for me may be uncomfortable, and it's just my growth. Or I have to like have a surgery that's going to be painful,
Mhm.
but it's important for my growth or my health to go through that surgery.
Okay.
Right? So I can't always say that seeking pleasure and avoiding pain in an absolute sense is the best way to make decisions. That's why I give the example of the dentist.
Mhm.
Right? Going to the dentist may be painful or uncomfortable, but it's actually good for us in the long run.
Mhm.
Right? Or like flossing my teeth. It doesn't really feel good actually. Maybe sometimes like if I don't do it for a little while, I'm like, I just need to clean my teeth. You know, and it feels good in that sense, but it actually doesn't really feel good. It's like the after effect maybe or whatever. I don't know. Is that good for today?
Yeah.
I think so. I think like the next thing is we can talk about different kinds of habits and then explore certain principles, refining out what those would be. But I think it's best to have it in this kind of a step-by-step process. What is the value? What is the principle, the action orientation based on the value? And then what are the habits? And how do we situate the values? It would be relevant to the meaning of your life and the meaning of life as a human being. Right? Because there has to be some fundamental axiom that all of this rests on. Otherwise, it's just floating in space. Right? So I've listed some values that are universal, like self-love or self-interest, being pro-social, be good to other people, right? That's like the the counterbalance to antisocial personality disorder, or being a psychopath, right? Or some issues in narcissism. And then the value of understanding. The hierarchy of our values is important because it's like when I'm making a decision, sometimes there may be conflicting values. Like I said, with self-love and being pro-social. So sometimes you'll be in a situation where you're like, I want the best for that person. What's the best for you? But it's not good for me. Right? And that's important to figure out. Like, again, just because it makes me uncomfortable, maybe it's just I need to grow up a little bit. Or this experience is a growth thing for me. Right? Like if somebody had agoraphobia and they had children, and their children had like a play or something like that, and the parent was scared of being in public, right? They could say it's not good for them specifically, but it's good for the child. And so you could say, well, does that mean that they shouldn't go to the recital or the play or whatever? And you say, well, no. Maybe what it is that that's an opportunity for the parent to grow and use it as a motivation to get over their phobia. Right? So it's not just your feelings. That's why I said it's not just your feelings or other people's perception of you or some objective analysis is necessarily always true. It's that we have to have some way to evaluate it and make sense of both those things at the same time. And so as we're going through life, we have to choose a value. What's more important, this or that? And that's kind of how the priority will move itself. And there's certain ways that we can identify, is this value good? And so one would be like, how does it relate to being human? Right? Like if you're intoxicated, and that's something that you do, you have to recognize that your liver and kidneys are sustaining damage. Right? Or if you smoke cigarettes, your lungs are sustaining damage. Your heart is sustaining damage. That's just the human condition. Even though it feels good, objectively, it doesn't matter what it feels like in that situation. It's just not good for you, right? There's a different habit that you can engage in based on a principle and on the value of like health, right? Like health is kind of like with self-love. And so when you're faced in a situation where there's a decision to be made, being aware of the choice and consciously making that choice is something. Sometimes we have to kind of go by our feelings, right? Like, how does this make me feel? And imposing our expectations, I make that mistake a lot. I'm very like in my head, and I have to like remind myself to do what feels good. I did that today. There's something that I was like, my mind was telling me to do something, and then the critical part of my mind was like, don't do it. Here are your principles, and it violates principle 3. And I was like, fuck. But then I was like, no, all of those principles don't matter because how I feel is the most important thing. And so my value, and part of the reason why I changed my name is I almost died twice of a heart attack, right? And I'm young for that. And so me not listening to how I feel has led me to a very negative outcome. right? Because I had all these plans and I'm sacrificing my humanity for something specific. So that doesn't work. You're contradicting the nature of your existence with that. And so as soon as I did the thing that I felt like doing, my body got excited. Like I could feel excitement in my body, you know?
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, I guess that was the right thing to do. It's important to do this because, again, seeing this trajectory of your growth in life and the decisions you can make and how you're doing stuff, being aware of these situations over time, it does require self-awareness. And we can get better at that, right? Through journaling and meditating and reflecting. Like those are habits that we can do. Like meditation, reflection, writing.
I would say art as well, drawing, writing.
Okay, hello. Hi.
Hi. I'm a little bit late, but I'm still here.
It's okay, it's
Spirit.
okay. Art is good, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's yeah. I would say that being artistic it's different than having an objective understanding or self-awareness of ourselves. Art may be like a way to express ourselves. It's a little different than the objective thing. It's not less valuable. It's just not the how do I be aware of myself here, right? It's like a I don't know. Art is almost like a spiritual thing or a mind thing. I equate spirit with mind. I think this is good for today. I said a lot. Sometimes I feel like I haven't like reached a pinnacle. I don't know. Because part of it is I'm trying to figure it out as I talk too. This is like a think tank for me.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'm pausing because I'm like, I don't know what to say now. I'm like, what am I supposed to say now? And then I look at it like a math problem. I'm like, oh, this is the right answer. And then I continue. So that's actually what I'm doing. And I told Natalia on the way up here, I was like, I have no idea what I'm talking about today.
I always think of your style as a mind map, and then we kind of just expand it.
It's true. It's true. Habits, we're breaking down the values, and then principles and habits is like the next thing. And principles are going to be relatively situation specific, you know?
What if your values change during your lifetime?
You value change.
Can they change?
Oh, if your values change.
Values.
Well, that's what this is. The revaluation of values. It's the changing. You could just drop a value completely,
Mhm.
which is the thing, but it's also the priority of values. Like, how do I rank them? Which is what he's talking about. And maybe you'll just kick it right off the list.
Mhm.
And so to do that is to look at the value and connect it with you, which goes back to the coherence, purpose, and significance, right? And then also look at humans in general, right? Like, for example, if someone values being drunk,
Mhm.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
right? They just
Yeah.
like being drunk. Or I used to smoke weed all the time. I valued being high. And then I recognized that it was directly conflicting with my well-being. And I wanted to learn to deal with problems without that specific substance. I was like, I can't just always smoke weed whenever I'm a little anxious or upset, because now I just need weed to deal with my life. That's not actually good. You
That's
know?
addiction.
Yeah.
I feel like every coping mechanism, like if you overdo it, that's what it becomes, right?
Mhm.
And like with weed, it's like brain fog too. Like you're in academia, so like brain fog's gonna catch up too, right?
Yeah.
That's
So
also a form of escapism, I believe it's called.
Yes. Yes, coping mechanism and escapism.
yeah, so that's why that value of doing that, like being pro marijuana, I was like, well, no, like marijuana has a place. And when you brought up moderation earlier, that's a valid point. And so because it contradicted my humanity, right? Like I can't be fully human, like me being human or me being a marijuana smoker. And I just said, I came to a point, I was like, I'd rather just be human. And sometimes I'm like, I feel like I want to smoke weed again because I want to experience that state, like yesterday or today. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just go get some and, it's so easy for me to get. It's so easy to get it, right? It's like,
It's crazy. So I was in Vegas. Do you know how many dispensaries they have? Barely any. Here, it was actually hard to buy weed and also smoke weed because they were like super strict with it. And every time I was smoking, just to calm, like relax, because I didn't want to drink a lot. I can't drink a lot anymore. So basically,
good.
I was getting judged. I was getting judged for smoking weed. And I'm like, since when did Canada become so fucking chill? Like, we're literally right beside California, and we're in Vegas, and I'm getting judged for smoking weed, while in Toronto it became like it's I'm getting judged for smoking cigarettes rather than weed.
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Nuts.
So that's where I said that there's specific values and there's universal values. So dropping the value, maybe you realize the value doesn't even make sense, right? Like growing up and having the other people tell me that God is great, God is awesome, do what God tells you to do. And then my own intellectual philosophical analysis, I was like, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't necessarily go against my humanity, unless you say that reason is part of your humanity. And if it doesn't make sense, don't believe in it, right? You can develop your own conceptualization of God that's different than what Catholicism or Christianity or Hinduism says. That's fine. But I was just like, I'm dispensing of this value. I don't value it. And so in like grade 8, I didn't get confirmed. It was a little awkward. I was one of 3 people out of like a room of 200, and I was like, what, 13 or something like that? 12? And I had to say, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I had to walk out. I was like, it just made me very uncomfortable. I was like, you guys are all crazy. You guys, I'm sorry. And they thought I was crazy. Like, that guy's fucking weird. He's not conforming to what we are doing.
Conforming in like what, school-wise or?
So in Catholic school,
Catholic.
Yeah.
there's like rites of passage.
Oh, I was friends with Catholic kids. They were weirdos. You're probably right.
Okay. And so
No.
when you're in grade 8, there's like one of the almost final rites of passage called confirmation, because you're baptized, but you don't have autonomy. You can't make a decision to be baptized. You just can't throw water on you. They're like, you are a part of us. And then, or drown you.
I was thinking water gun. Like,
Don't
did
exaggerate.
you see
Like,
people getting
God
baptized?
is still
during
good.
COVID?
I'm
God
sorry.
is good. The Christianity is good.
Okay.
It's values. It's good.
Oh, I'm
values.
not saying religion is bad. I'm just saying the Catholic guys that I knew were way worse than the public school kids. There's nothing wrong with religion. I would say that. No.
I just be
I
funny.
agree with the Catholic part. Catholic is like a
Yeah, some
totally
parts
different
of it.
ballgame. Like the West Church and the East Church are like night and day, in my
I'm
opinion.
getting more inside.
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me. And I wasn't going to just follow the herd. I had to trust myself. And I evaluated that based on my logic and reasoning. Right? That was how I said, because if you're outnumbered, right? If 5 people think option A and you're the only one that thinks option B, well, if it was just a vote, you would lose. So is it always the case that if you're outnumbered, you're always wrong? And no, it's not. We can apply our reasoning, for example, right? And the group may be incorrect. Now, if I had like if God was just there with me, like, of course, I'd be like, oh, okay, right. Like if there was like a giant in the room and was just like there, like, well, obviously, just stepped on a dude. Like, I'm not gonna disagree with that thing. Like, that's just crazy, right? But for me, there's never been any experience ever of a ghost or God. Maybe my brain doesn't work. I believe my brain works very well. I think that's actually what's going on.
No, it's
And
just different social group. That's all. You belong to one social group. They belong to another.
sure, I was in Catholic school my whole life.
That's concerning. Just kidding.
No, it's fine. Part of the reason why I did it is because they get more funding in Ontario.
My mom
So-
my mom was trying to get me to a Catholic school, but then mine was kind of more of a cult, the one near my house. So they were trying to they were like, oh, how do we know you're truly Catholic? And my mom's like, okay, here's the documents. Like, yeah, you guys are from Ukraine. We're not sure if you're the right Catholics for us. And then they're like, you have to attend church for a year, so we know you're truly Catholic. And I'm just like, mom's like, I'm just trying to get my daughter a better future. You guys seem like a cult. Ironically, I was friends with those kids. Not one of them turned out okay. When I was a kid, I didn't really follow up. So I don't know.
I'm not gonna say all people that are Catholic are bad. I'm just, in my experience,
Oh, I'm just talking about this
Yeah, yeah.
particular school. So
Yeah.
that's ironic. I have no idea. Maybe your school is like they're running the country right now. You don't know.
no. The belief system itself, I just didn't want to conform. And at a very young age, like you're not even really an adult then. Your brain's not fully developed. I just was like, I can't do this, you know? And so I'm just trying to say that, like, just when you brought the KKK example, if you're a room full of people that are racist or people that like are misogynistic to women, right? It's weird. And so how do you step outside of democracy when the group is actually wrong? What do you do about that, right? And you can't force people to do shit.
Oh, especially if you're a minority, that's just unsafe, I would say. You don't know if they're violent.
But you can at least hopefully walk away,
Oh, yeah, I think that would be the best case scenario.
right?
Yeah.
And then if the majority is on the side of reason and ethics and being pro-social and like meaning human rights as well, and then there's one misogynist, we can, maybe have a conversation about why women have rights, and if they say something, it's valuable, and they're not just a means to an end, for example, right? And challenge that person's reasoning. You can do it as an individual in front of a group, but like you said, there could be hazards there.
I mean,
And so-
it depends on how big the group is. Like, if it's like 3 guys, one of them seems highly unreasonable, 2 seem very like they are willing to hear you out, maybe you can take that risk. But if you're in a group of 20, like a frat house, for example, and you're not sensing, you're in the right place, you should probably.
Yeah. The point is that just like, yeah, and sometimes how do we not have, like, this is where like democracy comes on, or just the group outnumbering the individual, right? And in the case with me as a younger person, I wasn't in a position to argue 200 students and some teachers were all indoctrinated. That wasn't going to happen, right? So I just left, So anyways, the point is that it's important to have principles and values and then develop healthy habits to fulfill what those values are. And over time, you can become a great person, right? Through those micro decisions every instance. And some situations are going to be very challenging. I've been recently dealing with some challenging situations, and I'm getting better at navigating them, and we also have like today, I had to tell myself, this is a growth situation for me. I feel overwhelmed, and I'm not going to let my feelings dictate what I'm going to do. I'm not going to stand down from what I think is right. And I feel I had, in some ways, a conflicting thing, the Philosophy Society and my duty to a person that I'm trying to help and take care of. And I was like, this is actually challenging for me. I had to take a time out and meditate for 40 minutes, which I don't know always have to do that. I'm usually pretty good. Meditating is important every day, but if I am explicitly doing it because I am, going down panic attack mode or whatever, for me, that's like, this is a growth experience for me, Just running away from situations where you feel uncomfortable, that is not universal. You can't universalize that. Sometimes we'll be in a situation that's challenging, like an interview for a job, right? And what can we do to be successful in those situations and increase our character, right? To be the kind of person that can be there and face challenges head on. And all right, is that good for today?
That's good.
Okay. I don't know what we're going to talk about next time, but yeah. Like one thing is like actually practicing meditation, practicing reflection, practicing like just doing the things. That's really something to talk like, and that's not even really a talking thing. All of this was leading up to what do I do and how do I do it? And then actually doing it. And so next week, we will not be here for the next 3 weeks, right? Because this place is closed.
No, wait. For the next week, yes.
Next week we are here.
The 13th, yes.
13th, we're here. But then after that, for 3 weeks, it's a ghost town. And the sheriff doesn't know what to say. So
Online.
it might be online.
Okay, I don't know how many meetings I'll miss, so let me just double check.
All right, guys, we're gonna go. Thank you for joining. And I'll talk to you guys later.